Yeah, so it's really exciting. So this week, IRIS.TV, LiveRamp, and SpringServe announced a new strategic partnership. Now, what the strategic partnership is really all about is how do we bring video-level contextual data to the planning process. IRIS.TV is a video data platform. We specialize in video data connectivity. And what that basically means is that we're accessing the underlying source data that sits under editorial pieces of content. Things that historically have been locked away in content management systems, CDNs, different video infrastructure pieces of the ecosystem. And what the partnership is really all about now is how do we access that data so that we can inform the planning process. That's something that historically has been very, very challenging. And what IRIS.TV has been focused on over the past 18 months has predominantly been around targeting. So how do we ensure that an advertisement runs adjacent to a certain type of content? And then how do we have that justification for the type of content verified by a third party? So we've spent a lot of time over the last 12 to 18 months talking about how do we target that right content. One of the pieces of feedback that we've been getting is that while targeting obviously is extremely important to the ecosystem, is how do we actually plan more effectively? How do we understand how many available pieces of inventory there are that perhaps run against food and beverage content? So that if we're talking to a QSR brand that's looking to run their piece of advertisement adjacent to that certain type of content, that they can really have a transparent conversation with a seller around the amount of inventory that's available. So the partnership is really about how do we bring that to the planning process. That's part one. Now part two is there's a lot of conversations around contextual versus audience. Now, we don't believe that it's a one or the other. It's really about how do we build a collaboration and bring these data assets together. And so when we were looking at partners that we could unify our video level contextual data with audience data, of course, no better partner than LiveRamp. And so really now we've put the Ramp ID and the IRIS ID together so that we can inform a planning process holistically cross-screen, looking at audiences and contextual. Now, both of those platforms are now sort of seamlessly tied together, but of course the last piece was how do we activate that data? And so obviously working with our partners at SpringServe, we're making this seamlessly available to publishers across all screens so that we can really bring this holistically to market.
Great. And for brand managers who may not be completely familiar with all the inner workings of the media and ad placements, how is this deal meaningful?
Yeah, so a lot of the conversations that we've been having have predominantly been with digital buyers over the last 12 to 18 months. And so that's buyers that are coming out of a pre-roll video experience and they're trying to understand how to spend those dollars in a digital world. And of course, the data that's available in digital is quite different than linear. Now, we've seen a huge increase in supply, obviously due to things like the pandemic and whatnot in the CTV space. And that's really started to change the thinking, specifically with the agencies, around how to think about linear budgets versus CTV budgets. And so one of the requests that we've been getting is how do we help the agencies and the brands safely migrate those investments from a more traditional linear planning experience into digital. Now, one of the things that we have been discussing with agencies, and just one example, is if you're planning a campaign and you're going to move a large sum of investment from a traditional linear screen to a CTV environment, but you can't account for something like brand safety. What's going to happen is as you inform that plan, you're going to assume that the addressable inventory is sort of 100% of the pie, when really it may only be 95%, 90%. What that will cause downstream is that when targeting starts to get applied, right, with the products that we've been working on for the last 2 years, you're going to shrink your available inventory. It's going to create a delivery issue. And so those are the types of things that the investment teams at the holding companies are obviously extremely concerned about. And so it's super exciting to be able to solve that in partnership with LiveRamp and SpringServe so that we can start to migrate linear dollars into digital to support the supply growth that we've seen over the last 2 years.
That's great. Thanks for explaining what it means for media buyers and advertisers. I want to flip the script a little bit. What do you think it means for the consumer experience as far as maybe seeing ads that feel more relevant or less intrusive perhaps, less repetitive?
Yeah, so look, obviously the big part of the partnership is around the ad ecosystem and the agencies, and of course the publishers. But of course, in the end of the day, we're all selling products of attention to consumers. And so one thing I think all of us have probably seen over the past 2 years is how, in some instances, irrelevant advertising can be to both the consumer and the content. And of course, that creates a huge issue in the ecosystem, right? If we diminish attention, we're going to shrink the supply sets. We're going to have less effective advertising, and of course, that erodes the market. So, in the end, a lot of these solutions are not rocket science. A relevant ad next to a relevant piece of content that resonates with the consumer will perform better for all constituents. And so really, although we're addressing market needs from an advertiser perspective, in the end, we hope that the consumer is the one who wins by having a more enjoyable experience of content and advertising.